In this video, you will learn how to create a new project and start to learn a bit more about the underlying mechanics of NRG. To create a new project, you can either go from the File menu and click New Project, or use the Project Manager and click the Blank Project button. First thing that you'll have to provide is a name for your project, My Project. This name will not only be used as your project name, it will also be used as the final executable name that you will output when you are deploying your application, but also as the name of the root directory that will contain all your project data. Second thing that you have to provide is the core profile that you would like to use for your project. The core profile will give you capabilities and functionality based on that specific version that you choose. In this case, we're going to keep it to be OpenGLES 3.0. Orientation is basically only for mobile device and indicates the rotation of the screen for your application. The next step is to provide a valid path on your local drive where this My Project, the root directory, will be created. In this case, I will select my desktop, and enable physics simulation is just there for a question of convenience. You can enable it if you know that you're going to require physics simulation. If not, you can always reactivate it later. Let's click the create button, and now I'm having a blank project that is created. My next step is going to be to create a scene. NRG are constantly drawing scene, and each of these scenes have render layers. Render layers basically act like a layer in an image manipulation software. It will, just like in the GIMP or like in Photoshop, you're creating layers with image, with text, and the accumulation of all these layers output your final image. This is exactly the same way NRG is working. It is drawing scenes that contains layers, and the accumulation of all these layers, one or multiple one, will output your final render image. The first thing that we have to create when starting a new project is a default scene, as we used to call it, the startup scene. This scene will always be loaded as soon as your application starts. So first thing first, let's create a new scene. We're going to go in the library, select the library editor, click the asset menu and click new scene. Leave it as a default name, scene. Asset group, I do not have any. Basically, asset group is a subfolder from the root where you can place a certain category of asset, whatever you want. We're going to leave that blank for now. Disable these two, as I'm going to manually handle that later. And then I'm going to use this first scene as my startup scene. I'm going to create it. Automatically, you see that my library have been updated, my asset manager, also known as the library, have been updated, and my asset scene is located at the root. You can also notice that scene here have been added as the startup scene. Just near, we have already seen the layout menu here. Just near that, we have the application control buttons here to play, pause, step, mute, or full screen, and debug our application. So as scene is set as the startup scene, every time I'm going to push the play button, that will be the scene that will be loaded by default. Now, to load that scene and start editing it, I'm going to simply drag and drop it in my View 3D. As you can see right now, nothing is displayed. It's just the standard gradient that I'm seeing right now. If you're checking the render target, it is set to application, the final result of that scene drawing, all those render layer output if you want. Now, I only have one by default created for me, which is called Untitled. I'm going to select my first render layer and start editing it. You can see that it is now fully empty. The first thing that I'm going to have to do is to specify a camera and give that camera behavior. NRG is an event-based system, which means that each object and asset respond to specific event callback. In this case, I am editing the render layer, which is located here. If I go into properties and then render layer, this is my render layer. This render layer would require a camera. There's multiple ways you can actually draw output the image of a specific render layer. We will see advanced method in later video, but for now, let's go with the basic. Create a camera and assign that camera to be our main responder for that render layer. To do this, I'm going to select my View 3D, and once selected, I got access to its menu. So I'm going to go in Object, Add to Scene, select Camera, and then a perspective camera. Right now, since I have access to that camera, since that camera has been created into that scene, I'm going to be able to, while clicking on the camera icon, have access to the list of all the camera in my scene. I will choose that camera. So when my application is running and when this specific scene is drawing, I'm going to first start drawing the scene, which will leads me to render that specific layer, that specific render layer, and I will use this camera to draw that layer. Next thing is to assign a behavior to that camera. For this, I'm going to need another asset, a script asset. I will go back here in my library, Asset, New Script, give it the default name, and create. Right now, I got my scene asset and I got my script asset. My camera is selected in my viewport, so I can have access to its object property. In object property, I will see that I have scripts here, and I'm going to add a new thread. This will allow me to run that script into a unique environment, a specific environment that is initialized when you're creating a new thread. I'm going to take that script and drag it all the way to the thread asset field. Next is to code a specific event. If I open the events here, I do not have any result. I need to code an event for that script. And as I'm going to draw, the responsive event will be on draw. For this, I'm going to go in my layout and select my coding. I have my code editor that is located here. And as you can see on the list of all script that I can edit, I got my script right here, which I'm going to select. My script is currently empty. At this point, you got the choice to either manually create the script, write down the code, or you can use Visual Node. To activate the node, we're going to click this button right here. And as you can see, now my code editor is read-only. I cannot type in, I can only drive the code by node. To switch between the code editor and the node editor, I'm going to go up here in the menu of the code editor, and I'm going to select the node editor. Since my script is only driven by node, I'm going to be able to push spacebar while being selected, and I'm going to go search my onDraw event, which will appear here. I got my onDraw event that is creating my event callback for onDraw. I'm going to drag the plug, release, and go search clear. If you're familiar with graphic programming, you know that the first thing that you need to do, well, before you're able to draw on a back buffer or on a frame buffer, an output of a render layer, you will need to first clear that buffer. So what we're going to do, we're going to select Clear Color, click the color control, and go search, let's say, light blue to simulate the sky. Very simple. I'm going to go search and click on my next plug, and I'm going to search clear again, and I'm going to look for my graphic API clear. This will allow me to clear the default buffer that I'm having. In this specific case, the color buffer. So on the draw event of my camera, I would use that clear color and clear the color buffer. As soon as I click, I can see that now I start actually drawing something, my background color, my clear color, that is taking over all the render buffer that I'm currently editing. And this is how you start drawing. This is the beginning of your rendering sequence.